I'm now looking at carbohydrates and exercise performance, and there's absolute clear evidence. All you need for carbs and exercise performance is just to prevent hypoglycemia. That's it. You do not need muscle glycogen. You don't need muscle glycogen. It's a complete red herring. You can burn fat at huge rates.
You know, I spent the first 6 months of lockdown in your hometown where you were born, in Harare, Zimbabwe.
Oh, lovely.
So yes, and so I had known about, gosh, you're so famous for all that you went through with the legal system, right? And so that's how I knew you, but everyone there knew you for Banting and all of that. And so I read all your books while we were on lockdown. And I was so intrigued, Dr. Noakes, by your observations of the San, because I spent a great deal of my time going to study with indigenous cultures that are still living in their traditional way. Just this year alone, I've been on 3 continents. I've been in the Amazon and sub-Saharan Africa. I just left Mongolia. And I noticed with all of them that they don't really drink much water at all. And they can exercise for very long periods of time. And so when I read Waterlogged, and then I was later really researching vasopressin a lot and some of the other hydration hormones, I kept coming upon your name and the fact that you had made these insights as well. And so I just had to get some, I just really wanted some of your time. So thank you for agreeing to meet with me today. I would love to talk to you about hydration if you're not tired of this.
No, because I don't often get to speak about it. It's always about nutrition.
Oh, good. Yes, I'm a nutritionist too. Well, I'm a nutritionist, you're a doctor, but I work with a lot of the ancestral diets and the medical diets, and I really specialize in neuromuscular conditions, particularly dysautonomia, where there's a severe dysregulation of the autonomic nervous system, which makes me very interested in hydration because the hydration hormones are so dysregulated, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So I was blown away by your book. When sometimes you open up a book and it feels like you're going into a secret garden of knowledge, that's how I felt about your book. I felt light bulb after light bulb going off. And I feel like I have so many questions now and so many insights, and I'm kind of rethinking. I don't know about you, but one of the things that I really love about this field is that I'm so often humbled into realizing how little I know and then learning something that just totally changes the game. And I feel like your research on hydration is one of those big things that really changes how we see things. So I'm reading your book and I keep reading about the encephalitis, right? And this is something that all of my clients with dysautonomia have. And they have all of these symptoms, and they're really treated as if they're in a state of extreme dehydration, which may be the case. I couldn't help, after reading your book, wonder if it's not the opposite. If they're not dealing if they're not actually overly hydrated, and that if that couldn't be causing a lot of their disabilities, right?
Yeah.
I grew up as an extreme athlete, and I was training for Ironman. I actually ended up with dysautonomia from an infection and was fully disabled for 12 years, but have been now in remission for 10, thank goodness. So now I work with clients. But before that, I was an extreme athlete, and I was training for marathons and Ironman. And I know I'm not the only practitioner that sees the correlation between extreme athletes and developing this condition. And I to wonder if something isn't involved there, especially because of something you said in your book. I actually pulled it out. And let's see, let me pull up that. Yes. You had written in the book that endurance training reduces the sensitivity of the sympathetic nervous system to respond to sudden stress. And what all these people have in common is that they have very imbalanced sympathetic activity, right? And so I do wonder if some people aren't slightly more susceptible, or if the extreme stress of going through the trials of that kind of athleticism doesn't then make you a bit weaker, just like any other stress could do, even a positive stress, potentially.
Yeah. I'd look at diet as well,
Oh, yes. Yeah, I think diet is the biggest one. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think, I gave a talk at Low Carb USA earlier this year on post-viral and post-bacterial dysautonomia. We saw it. I live in Africa as well. I live in Cape Town, actually, where you do. I'm almost never there, but I have a little beach house there and a little bed and breakfast in Fishhook, actually, just the tiny little community. I love it.
Well, I grew up in Glencairn, so.
No, you didn't.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So with living in Africa as well, we were around during the Ebola epidemic, and we saw the survivors, right, deal with a lot of dysautonomia and these kinds of things. So I was talking on this at the conference last year, and really, I could find a lot of research pointing towards it being a dietary condition, that people don't have enough foods with specifically enough proteins and foods with thiamine in them to control the cytokines. Yeah, so I think it's primarily dietary. I'm wondering if there's not more to it. I've had no problem in reversing it in my own self. I mean, it took a long time to hack, but it happened. And also with all the clients I work with. But I'm seeing the numbers really increase. And that was part of why it was the topic of my discussion, because it went from a pretty rare condition, even historically very rare, to 80 million people now have it. And so I feel like this information needs to get out to the public so that people can help themselves. And because it is something they can help themselves with, right? Through diet and lifestyle, absolutely. So, but I have to wonder if there aren't other ways to get at it as well. So right now, I have people doing a mindset to calm down their system, right? To get back into parasympathetic mode, breath work, of course, for HRV, lifestyle, things like getting light in the morning and all that kind of thing, cold therapy. And then, of course, diet. So they go into a ketogenic diet that's pretty strict. Basically, it's like very strict, but enough protein to give them the amino acids for their mood to get through such a hard thing. Anyway, the hydration issue is significant in these conditions. And nowadays, people are prescribed a lot of IV fluids. So they'll have people come in and give them IVs. I know. Luckily, that didn't happen when I was sick with it. They basically would just tell you to take a lot of salt and then give you some medications like Midodrine, Mestinon, things to increase blood volume, blood flow, these kind of things. But now they are suggesting prescription vasopressin to be used. And yes, I see you're shaking your head. I was wondering your interpretation, because that's my inclination to say this can't be good. Yeah.
Sure, because vasopressin is one of the most powerful hormones, and it's going to cause fluid retention, and that's going to cause hyponatremia, brain swelling, and so on. And that if you read Waterlogged, you'll see I started on the story of dehydration causing heat stroke. And then so to go right back to my beginning of my story. So I started medicine in 1969. And in 1969, these two South African scientists at Wits, Professors Wyndham and Stradham, published the paper, which I analyzed in great detail. And what they actually were studying was sugar and marathon running. So they had these guys eat more sugar for a week before the marathon. And then the other time they didn't increase their sugar intake. And they found that they performed slightly better when they increased their sugar intake. But they also measured their weight before and after the race and their post-race rectal temperature. And this was not the trial. The trial was about sugar. It wasn't about water balance and heat. And they came across the serendipitous this relationship between percentage weight loss and post-race rectal temperature. So they said there you are causal. The dehydration is causing the rise in body temperature. And the American College of Sports Medicine used that as their main reason for telling people you need to drink more during exercise, even though it wasn't a clinical trial, it wasn't a randomized control trial. And so what happened to me, and it's interesting because I've just seen my friend again, we went to study a race between Port Elizabeth and East London where these guys paddled 4 days. And the last day, there was an 18-year-old guy, Oscar Chalupsky, who's just written a book, and you might want to read it because he's got cancer, etc. But anyway, he became a great friend of mine. So Oscar, the day before the race started, he's 18-year-old, and he's speaking to all these champions, and he says, guys, you're competing for second place. I'm going to win this race. This is 18-year-old. So anyway, he's leading the race, and the last day is, I think it was about 30 kilometers or so. So it was 4 or 5 hours. And as he came out of the waves, because he had to get off the beach, he lost all his water. So he had to paddle for 5 hours without water. And so we'd measured his weight before. And then as he came out the water, he came directly to me and we weighed him, and he'd lost 5 kilograms. So now I knew his rectal temperature was going to be huge, because losing that amount, according to the theory, he must have heat stroke. Right. And his body temperature was spot normal, absolutely normal. So I knew that this is a fake story. And so then we went and researched, and it was very clear that your rectal temperature is determined by how fast you're exercising. That's it. And if what had happened in that study was the fastest runners sweated the most, because that sweating is also linked to how hard you're exercising. And they'd lost the most water, and they happened to be running the fastest, so they had the highest rectal temperatures. So the third factor was metabolic rate. That's what was driving everything. So then we went and did a couple of studies and proved that. So then I realized that the whole dehydration story was rubbish. And then, as you see in Waterlogged, that lady wrote to me after the Comrades Marathon, and then that blew it open, and then we followed her and did some other studies and eventually proved that it wasn't dehydration, it was overhydration. There's a little side story there, because in 1981, that was the year that we described that case, the first case came to my attention. By about 1983, 1984, I was very certain that it was fluid overload. And a friend who was a member of parliament in South Africa, his wife ran the Comrades Marathon in 84, I think it was, and she collapsed 10 kilometers from the finish. So of course she's got dehydration. They asked me, I said, no, she's not dehydrated. She'll be overhydrated. And of course she was. Yeah, and then she ran subsequently many years doing fine. So by 1984, I knew that it was overhydration. And and then eventually 85, we got a paper published. Then 91, we had a paper published. And that I thought that would be the end of it, but it wasn't. It was just the beginning, because Gatorade was starting to produce their product, and they bought all the scientists. And you know, what's really interesting, this is an aside, but I'm now looking at carbohydrates and exercise performance, and there's absolute clear evidence. All you need for carbs and exercise performance is just to prevent hypoglycemia. That's it. You do not need muscle glycogen. You don't need muscle glycogen. It's a complete red herring. You can burn fat at huge rates. We've just measured the highest rates of fat oxidation ever reported in humans. And these guys were doing intervals at 85% of VO2 max. Now, the textbook says at 85% of VO2 max, you cannot burn any fat. And we found the highest rates of fat oxidation ever in humans at 85% VO2 max.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so you can cover all your fuel requirements from fat, but you do need a touch of glucose if you're going to do the Ironman or so, but it's a touch, it's not much.
I found that too. I work with, I have a lot of professional athletes on my books, and we do the ketogenic diet with them, and they're obviously fantastic athletes. No issue, quite the opposite. They're the top of their field. And we don't have to do carb cycling or anything like that. They can just stay in it through the whole year and they're good to go. Yeah.
Okay, at any time. I'm having a lovely time with the Consul General in Cape Town of India, who's obviously Hindu, he's obviously vegetarian, you see. So he reads somewhere, I don't know why, but he comes and speaks to me and he says, and he's a little bit overweight, he's got a bit of visceral obesity. And so I say, no, you see, your diet, this vegetarian diet's not good for you. So he said, but how can I change being an Indian and having to have all these visitors come and they expect to eat vegetarian diets? So anyway, eventually he invited me to lunch and then he served me a pretty carnivorous diet. And eventually he decided that's it. And he's gone completely carnivore. So, and he ran a
big flip. That's amazing.
Yeah, amazing. And he looks amazing. He's lost all his obesity. And because Indians always look a little bit, they've all got a little bit of fat around them. He hasn't got, he's looking muscular and good. He runs the comrades. And all the people who are eating carbs, they can't stay with him. And he runs for a club just down the road here. And he said, oh, he had all this pasta loading. And he said, I didn't have anything to do with it. They said, oh, you're not going to finish the comrades. Meanwhile, he had to drag these people through at the end. And and what's interesting, he's run the comrades and then he ran another 65K race. And this is the guy who doesn't train much. And then he ran a marathon, all in the last month post-comrades.
Wow.
Now, he shouldn't be able to do that. No. And he's looking fantastic. And I said, you're not allowed to run these races. So then he goes and runs them anyway. So he's doing fine. And I'm just wondering, if they recover so quickly now if you're on the start, because you don't get inflamed, so that you can go and do these other things. Yeah.
Yes. And I think too, what I find the public especially really misunderstand about nutrition is that the different macros have different purposes. Fat and protein build, right? They rebuild. And so if you're needing to recover quickly from an extreme race or from a surgery, you want protein and fats. The carbohydrates don't help you in that situation. So I had a knee surgery earlier this year, just a couple of months ago. And it was remarkable, actually. I was walking the following day. It's just really fast. So it's definitely the way to go. I give all my clients and friends, if they're having surgery, a little protocol to follow of basically just fasting, a proper fast, and then broth, and then only meat for a week. And then we bring in vegetables if they want. But the protein and the fat is always the important part. So it's wonderful to hear. And I'm not surprised he was able to do so well with all of his races.
One of the people I greatly influenced was Dave Scott, who you'll remember won the Ironman 6 times or so, 5 times. And he read the book and he wrote to me and he said, Prof, I've changed my diet and I will not allow any of my athletes to use high carb diets anymore. He said they just burn out on a high carb diet doing the triathlon, as you experienced.
Yeah, that's incredible. I'm so glad. And I really hope that this message of hydration trickles down, because I'm watching as everyone carries around water bottles everywhere. And that really, I feel like that started around like 98, 99. Everyone started to bring water bottles with them everywhere. And now it's so prolific. So one of the things I do is I help bring documentary crews and other researchers into some of the tribal regions where I've developed relationships. And one of their biggest concerns is always water. And I just see them trucking in all of this water. And I always wonder, like, do we not think about the fact that people are already living here and they're okay?
No, you can't, they can't see it.
No, and it's been a phenomenal thing for me to see in my own self, how I went from being one of these people long before I read your book and learned far more, but just naturally becoming less thirsty on the ketogenic diet and not needing as much water. So to where I could leave and not think about taking water, right? Whereas before you would always have it with you. Yes.
Sure. Yeah,
Yes.
it's amazing how we've been so brainwashed by industry. It's just too terrible.
Isn't it incredible? And it's in areas that you just don't realize until you see it. It's almost like you have to have the glasses to see it. Some areas are more blatant than others, but the water, I think, is really missed. And when I look at all the symptoms that you listed in your book of both dehydration, and the opposite, I see so much of that in the public. And so that has me thinking, are you familiar with, I'm not very familiar with this, which is why I'm asking, but are you very familiar with the Russian method of dry fasting?
No.
I'm not either. I had some friends do it back in the day and be really into it. And now, after exploring your book further, I'm going to dive into that, because I am wondering if people who have issues with vasopressin, right? With men, we're seeing it's like their oxytocin, right? So it's like their bonding chemical. We're seeing really low levels clinically.
Yeah.
And then with my kind of clients, I'm seeing obviously very imbalanced levels of vasopressin and the other hydration hormones. And so I'm wondering if something like doing the opposite of what is recommended, where you actually restrict water instead, if that wouldn't click the body into rebalancing the mechanisms.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, what you're talking about is some sort of resistance. Like, we have leptin resistance, we have insulin resistance. Yeah. And I'm wondering, is it vasopressin resistance or is it something else resistance?
That's what I'm wondering. I'm so curious as to that, because if we can have resistance with these other hormones, I would think certainly we can have it with vasopressin.
You have to. Yeah.
Yeah.
But okay, so I'm thinking on my feet.
Yes.
But vasopressin is secreted when you're dehydrated. If you're overhydrating, so the question is, why don't you switch off vasopressin secretion? That's always the question. Why are you overhydrated? Why don't you switch off vasopressin? So in other words, it's actually resistance to whatever's stopping vasopressin secretion. That's where the resistance is.
Okay.
So that's, you'd have to look into that. And as I understand it, vasopressin is released when your blood chemistry is going up, when your sodium is going up. So it would be a resistance to a rising blood sodium concentration or increasing osmolality. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering as well, because, in a healthy body, if hydration is good, and correct me if I'm wrong, if hydration is good, then vasopressin would drop.
Very low. Yeah, it'll be very low.
Okay.
It's it's like insulin. Insulin is a crisis hormone. Vasopressin is a crisis hormone. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you are suddenly dehydrated, it'll shoot up.
Yeah. Correct.
So what's interesting is that I'm working with these cases of supposed chronic dehydration going on for years and decades, right? But their ADH is low. They have low ADH chronically, right? And they're now being treated, or they're recommended to be treated with the medication of vasopressin. So I'm wondering what can be done for these people. I'm wondering, like, to raise ADH, I've seen some things. So I've seen that you want to be standing up instead of laying down, and some lifestyle things, but these people are bedbound. So that's not a solution.
Yeah. And then when you're bedbound and your blood pressure is probably also involved in some way. So you're cutting out the response to standing up, which is important. Yeah. And
then they have low blood volume too, which really should trigger some of these hydration hormones, but it doesn't seem to in these cases. So it seems like something, it's suspected that this is rooted in the hypothalamus, right? Which would make a lot of sense because these are hypothalamic and pituitary hormones. But yeah, it's a real catch-22, but I think there's always an answer. And I'm wondering,
You have to do the exact opposite to what's being done, as you said. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. And I
must
don't know
go
if you know, oh, go ahead.
You must make them become dehydrated. Yeah, that's the key. You must stress them with dehydration. Yeah. Because there's no risk of dehydration. You know, I've never seen anyone die of dehydration. You know, except, sorry, if you lost in the desert for 3 days, yes,
sure.
Then you'll die. But you die of kidney failure and liver failure. You don't die of dehydration. Yeah.
Right. So, and these people do get kidney and liver failure, but it's years down the road. You know, it's after they've been sick for 8-10 years or more. So that's not an issue for most of them.
You know, I'm completely ignorant of this condition, so I'm really enjoying this discussion.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad. It used to be a very rare condition, but now post-COVID, we're seeing a lot more of it. We're seeing it. A lot of viruses, especially cytokine-related viruses, can affect the nervous system if they go in certain people, just like with polio, 1% of the population got the symptoms that we think of. Same with this. So, but yeah, it's a really fascinating condition. I love working with it. It was really interesting to have. You know, you end up with disease in all the different organs because of the lack of blood flow. You have real hypovolemia, right? Low blood volume. And it goes down into your feet and causes nerve damage like it does with diabetics. And so the treatment is typically very high sodium and these kinds of things. But I'm really thinking in general, the traditional treatment is not successful for the clients. It doesn't increase their quality of life and that kind of thing. So we've always had to kind of be our own doctors, those of us that have had it. And that's worked out really well. But I think there's more to the picture, especially after reading your book. So, okay, let's go back to the son because I'm really interested. Okay, so in all my hunter-gatherer visits around the world, I've noticed a couple of things that you brought up. You talked about how the San hunters are able to run for 6 hours in 45 degrees Celsius. And that out of those of you who are on the other system, 113 degrees Fahrenheit. It's no joke heat, while requiring minimal fluid. Now, I've been to the Hudson a few times and gone hunting with them. And we do about 20 kilometers in a day while hunting. It is so hard to keep up with them. And they do just fine. They don't really need water at all. Meanwhile, my crew is getting heat stroke or something, something you would know better. Yes. So it's really intrigued me. And I thought your insights were phenomenal. So I've got to talk to you about them because there's been a lot of criticism that hunter-gatherers must not be healthy because of their small stature, that they must not be getting enough food. And in your book, you discuss how that was actually an advantage in their environment. Would you tell us about that? I just thought it was brilliant.
Oh, yeah. No, being small is a massive advantage. And the best example is to go and look at the marathon that was held in Greece and the women's marathon. And Paula Newby-Fraser, who was by far, sorry, not Paula Newby-Fraser, I'm sorry, she's a South African. The top British runner who was the world record holder, and I forget for a moment, I forget her name. And there's no way she's not going to win, except it was 30 degrees plus. And she was 10 or 15 kilograms heavier than the Japanese lady. She didn't have a hope because to run at the other ladies' speed, she was generating so much heat, her rectal temperature would have been elevated. And she kept going for 30 kilometers and then she stopped on the side of the road. She says, I can't, I'm paralyzed. And that's exactly what happens. So the body's temperature rises, and then the hypothalamus says, listen, we're not going to allow you to get heat stroke. We're just going to stop you. You're going to stop and be paralyzed. And that's what happened to her. So there's the example of this relatively, she's a female, so she's not as big as the men. But at about 60 kilos, she was just too heavy. And she was beaten by a lady weighing 43 kilos who had no heat problems. So I think, I'm not sure if Waterlogged includes that story. Probably it doesn't, but it will have. We definitely had shown that being heavier, being bigger is a massive problem. And the smaller you are, the bigger the advantage.
Yeah, that was so insightful, because everyone else has talked about, that I've heard, the hunter-gatherers having kind of boy-like bodies because they weren't getting enough nutrition, and many of them have been pushed off their natural lands. And so they don't always have the big game that they had before. So that was a reasonable hypothesis. But when you talked about the average weight of all the marathon winners, and how it was always small, and the biological advantage of being able to run long distances in heat when your body is small, it all fit into place. It makes so much more sense, because these men that we visit are so healthy, and even the old ones are outrunning us, and we work out every day. So it was very impressive. It's very impressive, their level of conditioning.
Tell me, what is the Hadza said, oh no, they're vegetarian. I mean, these are the stories you read, and it irritates me so much.
It does for me too. And that's part of why I've been doing this. I started going to these tribes out of a personal interest. When I was bedbound for many years, and when I was bedbound, I got into anthropological books on tribes, and I started noticing that they were often eating the exact opposite of what I was told, and it made me do one of those switches of, maybe what I've been told isn't right. So when I healed on a old traditional diet and then went into remission, after I had been in remission for many years, I decided to go and travel and see if these tribes were still eating in these ways. Many of the books were from the 1800s. So I didn't know if they would still be there and how they would be living, if they'd still be healthy or in these just immaculate health conditions. And so I started traveling. And with the Hudson, no, it's quite the opposite. Now, it always depends on where they're based. What would be a small distance to us can be a big distance to them in terms of what's available to eat. And they just eat very locally. Within 20 kilometers of a run is what they eat. But no, they primarily eat baboon. That's their primary food, and dik-dik, which is a small antelope. They eat little plant matter, and I really expected them to eat a lot more. I really expected them to be kind of the counter to the Maasai, especially with what I had read. But with my first visit to the first tribe, first clan, really, the only plant that they ate the whole time were some pumpkin leaves, which wouldn't be part of a traditional diet, right? Pumpkin comes from the Americas, but it grows wild there now. The seeds have spread, but it was a minimal part of their diet. And their goal was to get baboon, which they ate a plenty of, along with dik-dik and some other animals. And then the second clan of that visit did eat some cassava, some root vegetables, but that was more of a side thought as opposed to a main dish. When you talk to them about what they enjoy eating, what their favorite food is, what they eat every day, it's always baboon. Baboon brain in particular is their favorite. So which maybe part of why they're so calm and relaxed, because it's so full of phosphatidylcholine, right? Which just relaxes us and makes us feel good and happy. So yes and no, they really don't eat much plant matter. Now, it would of course depend what season the researchers went in, but in general, what I've been finding on my visits is that most of the year, about 3/4 of the year, they're basically carnivore, if not completely. And then one season of the year, they have some access to some berries. If they're in a region where there's a drought, they might trade and get some maize. There's a few clans that do that, but there's not an abundance of plants that grow there at all. And it's a lot of work to get the plants, whereas it's minimal work and it's fun for them to get the baboons.
Well, it's really interesting because I've been very irritated by these people who write about the Hadza, because I'm a great friend of Mickey Ben-Dori, who from Israel. And he's studied the elephants and the fact that the Neanderthals ate the elephants. It's until they'd run out of elephants. And he's so convinced that we grew up eating meat and fatty meat.
Yes.
And his evidence is, he's got the evidence. And then these people go to see the Hadza and they come back and say, no, they're eating plants. And I
I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it. And I've had multiple visits and I've gone to multiple clans. And even when I'm in the high season where you would expect a lot of plant consumption, you don't.
Yeah.
You don't see a lot of it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And no one said they eat baboons. Not
one.
Really?
It's their main food.
Yeah. Well, it just shows that people never went to live with them.
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
or they went there.
They trade for different arrowheads, so they're very good huntsmen. And in fact, the way to become the leader of the clan is by being the best hunter. That's the most valued thing. And so it's a meritocracy. And they trade with the Datoga tribe, which are ironsmiths, and they're more agricultural. They're more like the Maasai in that they will raise some, traditionally it would have been sorghum, but they also eat a lot of meat. And that's their primary. Like when they feed their children, their first food is going to be butter and those kinds of things. So the Datoga make them all these arrowheads for the Hadza to hunt. And they have a different arrowhead for each animal that they hunt. But the one that they never go out without taking is the baboon arrow. And that one has to have digs going back because the baboon will try to pull it out. And so they engineered it so that the baboon could not pull it out. They do a lot to get the baboons. I mean, they really, really love eating baboon. They eat rodents too. We ate a very large rodent on the last trip. And it was interesting because the little babies, they love the feet. It's their favorite part, but so do the moms. So there was fighting, like a really cute fighting going on between them.
And presumably they cook the meat.
They do both, actually. So usually some of the organs are eaten right away, like the kidney and liver are typically eaten raw. And then they cook the rest of it. They'll poach the head over a fire. So it makes the brain taste like custard. I think that's why they all like it so much. It's really definitely in all my travels and also at home, the most delicious way to eat it. And then with the rodent that we caught while hunting, we were out on a hunt while they cooked it. So they just created a little fire and put it on it and basically singed the outside. The inside was still really pretty raw. But the other foods I ate with them were cooked. So when we ate the dik-tik and everything else, it was thoroughly cooked as far as the meat goes.
And how do they keep the meat? I mean, do they just eat it in one sitting or not? Or do they keep it?
They do. In general, they have an incredible sense of abundance. They don't even think about running out of food because there's always food. And so they're not worried about storing food for later. And so on one hunt, they were extremely prolific. They had multiple baboons, too much to eat in one day. And so they skinned the baboon and started preparing the skin for the extra ones. And then they just hung the carcass in a tree, flies all over it, and just let it stay there until the following day. And that's when they ate it. So not longer than an extra day would they keep meat or anything like that, but they certainly don't store things for the cold season. Even a lot of people will talk about their honey consumption, but what I think we've lost concept with, definitely in the States and in most other countries as well, is the seasonality of things. There's a season for honey and it's not year round. So they do consume it, but it's not as, it's not a bulk of their caloric input or of their diet. It's very small. And in fact, we were there during one of the honey seasons, and I always test if they allow me to for ketones and blood sugar. And they were all, which surprised me, they were all in mild ketosis, which I did not expect because they eat a lot of protein and not always a ton of fat. So based on the animals they were catching, right, they were more lean, but it was enough to get them into ketosis, which was really interesting.
Sure. So what do you do with all your information?
I'm collecting it. One day I'll put it out there. I keep hearing about more and more groups I want to go travel and see. And so I've been doing a lot of video. So I have hundreds of hours of video documentation. And then I also collect charts and things like that. So I have all the information and I take a lot of notes with each group. I try to go to each group in multiple seasons and return to each one. I've found it's really necessary because oftentimes I'll learn even more on the second visit. So yes, the relationship develops and all of those things. But yes, I'm sitting on it. But when I have enough time, I'd like to turn them into little documentaries because I want people to see really the birthright of health, how healthy humans can be. I think we don't even know what it looks like anymore, and these tribes have it. So I want to show the video of them.
Yeah, you're the modern Weston Price, or should I say his
I do
wife.
love Weston A. Price. He's a hero of mine.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So
So
I've been
is
going
there any way
around.
the Noakes Foundation, is there any way the Noakes Foundation could work with you to
Of
help
course.
promote this?
Yeah, of course. My mission, I have to tell you, Dr. Noakes, my mission since I got into remission was to do everything I could so that no one goes through this again.
Yeah.
And I find, or goes through what I did. And I find that really the way to health is often very simple. And it's often a far greater level of health than we can imagine. I don't know about you, I feel so much better now than even before I got sick and I was healthy, right? And I think that's a very common pattern. So yeah, I'll do anything to help get the information into the households and into the mom and dads. I so strongly feel that if all of the parents knew what you and I know, no one would get sick, or if they did, they would recover quickly. So yes.
The irony was when I was charged with Twitter, one of the things was I said, but this is how we always raised our children. We'd always weaned them on meat, you see, and liver and so on. And I was told that's no argument by the chief prosecution's witness, who was absolutely appalling. And she wrote the South African dietary guidelines, which actually say you must wean children onto meat, eggs, dairy, chicken, fish every day, or at least as often as possible, which is exactly what I said. But still they charged me. It's just
it's incredible.
The concept, yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible. And almost all the foods that parents are told not to give their children when they're first weaning are the foods that these tribes give their children. It's all like raw things, like raw liver, raw honey, raw egg yolk, these types of things, masticated meats, fat. Fat is a big one, whether it's butter or tallow. In Mongolia, where I just was, it's sheep fat tail. They just love that stuff. Yes. So good.
I must tell you another funny story that I actually got into this area. Sorry, I got into it for other reasons, but after it was known that I was promoting the high-fat diet, two of my friends who ran the wall of China, they ran the whole distance. And when they're in Mongolia, they couldn't find any food, and they discussed it with the locals. The locals said, "You've got to eat pork fat." And so that's what all they ate was pork fat for the rest of the run, and they're feeling stronger. And one of them then went to India, and he ran down India, which I don't know where it was. And he eventually was eating a chicken a day. And he said because he started eating the carbs and just got sicker and sicker. And then when he got a chicken a day, he was fine. He just got stronger and stronger. Yeah.
That's so good. I think it's so great for strength. With taking all these teams into these regions, it's very common for the whole team to get sick, right? They're not used to the water, but they also have an immune system built for places like America and Europe and Australia. And I try to always go in deep ketosis because of what that can do for your immune system, the bolster it gives you, the little extra superpower. And so far, knock on wood, that has been very effective in not coming down with all the things, yes, that everyone else tends to. But no, it's really true. You can't survive in Mongolia if you're a vegetarian. It's not possible.
No.
No, plants just don't grow there at all. They they really survive mostly on fat. And even for myself, who, I've been on a very high fat diet for over 15 years. it was a lot of fat even for my body. I was like, whoa. It's really incredible. But then you see these people that are just vibrant and healthy and calm, right? They always have a calm, satisfied demeanor. And I don't think that's any kind of coincidence at all.
Someone noticed that about the Plains Indians as well, the North American Plains Indians, that they were very calm and happy.
Yes.
It might have been Weston Price, but it was someone.
Yeah, everywhere I go, it's a level of satisfaction and joy that we don't see. We just don't see. There's no anxiety about tomorrow. There's no depression about yesterday. They're incredibly present in each of these places that I go to. And that presence brings a lot of lightness and joy. And it was interesting in Mongolia because they're known as the warriors, right? They're known as these really tough people, and they are, but they're tough like the Zimbabweans and the South Africans. They have grit. And they have a lot of grit and resilience, but they're very warm and generous. So just actually similar. So it was interesting to see, you know, this region, and actually they had a lot in common with the Maasai. You know, the Maasai, long before I had ever visited them, what you read about them is that they were the kind of the nobles of the region, right? Like they would just wipe anybody out that they wanted to. They would take what they wanted. And these kind of things, they kind of ruled in a non-official way. And then you go and you visit them, and they're so regal and beautiful and calm and strong. They're very, very strong, right? And I think a lot of that comes from that stability of their blood sugar and the triggering of that satiety hormone, and then all of those amino acids to build up their feel-good chemicals, because they're just radiant in all ways. It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. Yeah.
A book I came across was What Did Primitive Man Eat, or something like that, by De Vries. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
No.
Because he went through the documents that, particularly the people, the sailors visiting the Pacific Islands, the South Sea Islands. And he said every group was more beautiful than the last. And he said the one island were the most beautiful people he'd ever seen on Earth. And the island appears in the song by the Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Southern Cross. If you see Southern Cross, they head out towards this island, and I figure it's Malaysia. It's not Malaysia, it's something like that. And anyway, he said they were the most beautiful humans he'd ever seen were on that island. Then they got wiped out, of course, because the foods arrived and they became a problem. Yeah. Also, there's the story, which you might find interesting, was the mutiny on the Bounty.
Oh, tell me.
Because what they did was, when they mutinied and they kicked whoever the guy was who was the captain, he was given a little boat, and he was set off in sight of the island, so they knew that he would be safe. So they knew that the British would eventually find them. So they decided to go off and find an island which was very deserted. And I think they found the Pitcairn Islands, but to go there, they took a group of women from Tahiti with them. And so they formed a new population, and people said they were incredibly beautiful as well. But then eventually they got captured and sent back to eat the terrible food, and then they just became very ordinary again. So that was, but that was interesting that the South Sea Islanders were considered the most beautiful people on the planet, and they were eating fish and coconut or something. Yes, yeah.
Oh, completely. Yes. Yeah, I'm going to go to that region later this year. I'm hoping to, or really in the beginning of the year, I'm hoping to get to the Polynesian Islands, where there's a group of people known for their breathing techniques that allow them to go very deep into the water, and they live primarily off seafood and from diving. Yes. Yeah, so I'm hoping to get there, as well as a few other places in that region. Papua New Guinea, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Get to this year. Yes.
With the cannibals of Papua New Guinea.
I know it's a more dangerous place to go. Yes.
Would you get eaten? You just get eaten or something?
Hopefully not. From my research, and who knows, you never know if it's right. But usually I think the cannibalism is mostly done as an act of war against tribes and not so much to people like you and I, but you never know.
Okay.
You never know. Yes, it's one of the more dangerous places to go for sure.
Well, this, I don't want to stop, but this has been a fantastic interview. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it. I've learned so much.
Thank you so much. Same.
I've learned so much.
Same. And I'm really excited to dive more. I feel like I've read your book twice now, The Waterlogged. I'm going to read it again because I think there's so much gold in there. And I'm so impressed by, it's rare to meet someone who's done 700 plus studies. I mean, the amount of studies you have done is, I don't know how you have the energy for all of that. It's really incredible what you have accomplished and such interesting studies as well. I can tell.
Yeah, thank you. I can't wait to get you the full unabridged Waterlogged.
Same.
You're just going to love it. You're going to love it.
I will dive.
All these little anecdotes that I picked up, because actually it's a history of my scientific career there. It's everything I did apart from the carbohydrates. Yeah.
That's incredible. That's incredible. I will dive in for sure. And I'm so excited to kind of broach the possibility that all of these patients with dysautonomia who are proclaimed as being chronically dehydrated may be dealing with exactly what your athletes were, which is the opposite issue, right? Encephalitis from being waterlogged, too much water. Tell me, because I know I need to let you go. Tell me how everyone can kind of find you and help support your mission. You have this wonderful organization. Tell us a little bit about it and the mission and how people can help support you.
Through the Noakes Foundation, probably the best. Through our website, the Noakes Foundation would be the best. Yeah.
Great.
That'd be ideal.
Okay, good. I'll link it and share it, and I will shoot you an email right away.
Fantastic. So it's been an amazing hour. Thank you very much. You are really one of the most interesting people I've ever met.
Thank you. I feel the same about you. I'm so grateful. You gave me an hour of your time. I can't even tell you how grateful I am. And it has been such a treasure to get to spend time with you. I'm looking forward to doing it again.